Welcome to Audacity Works, a podcast inspired by and dedicated to the working artist, the creative entrepreneur, and generally, doing the damn thing. This exists on the premise that the world belongs to those who have the audacity to believe that their lives have value. This is for you. Welcome back to Audacity Works. I am your host, Rachel Strickland, and this is episode number 128. My writing on my calendar has been done in pencil, and it leaves much to be desired. But yes, okay. Confirmation, this is episode number 128, and it is about living in the South. This episode is by request from my friend Brandi, who wrote to me saying, I'm wondering if you'd make a podcast episode about living in the South. I am excited to return to the swamps. They mean Florida. But with the political climate, I'm nervous on how to navigate day-to-day life and not let the bastards grind me down. Copy that. Good soldier, let's talk about it. This is a complex question, and there are a lot of different avenues that I could take to answer it. And I did a little research and I dug in. I'm like, maybe I'll find some good articles and put up a bunch of resources. But I've decided I'm not going to do that. This is not going to be a graduate level treatise on culture in the American South, because that's never going to fit into a 20-minute podcast episode. What I am going to do is tell you my own perspective and my own experience, and that is the only thing that I am an expert in. There's a bit of a counterpart to this episode, which is episode number 91, called Love Song to Summer and Why I Live in the American South. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. There wasn't really a point to making that episode other than that's just what was in my heart at the moment. And I'm glad that I did, because I got a handful of messages after it was released from other people who live in the South saying it brought them to tears and put some words to why we choose to live here. So thank you for that. Let's say more words about that. If you're curious, you have no idea really what the American South is. Technically, it's anything south of the Mason-Dixon line and east of Texas. But if you go to Texas and you're looking around, you're like, this looks like Southern culture. Well, it is and it isn't. Texas has its own culture. Also, Texas is fucking enormous. And within Texas, there are cities, and those cities have their own culture. And within those cities, there are neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods have their own culture. And it's not just Texas. It is like that everywhere. Not just in the South, not just in the United States, everywhere. And I think that's important to point out, because otherwise I'm just making grand sweeping statements about the South. So let's deal with the problematic aspects first, okay? What my friend was saying was within the political climate, they're nervous on how to navigate day-to-day life and not let the bastards grind them down. What do they mean by that? The political climate in the United States is no surprise to anyone. We're all watching in horror as people are being disappeared from the streets and rights are being taken away. And we're all worried about our futures. So why would it be any different in the South? Well, the same things exist in the South that exist everywhere else in the country. It's just a little bit more obvious in some ways. There are still streets named after slavers. There is still a Confederate monument right on the Battery in Charleston. There's lots of Confederate monuments. There's lots of Confederate monuments in the South. People say, well, the South is racist. Everywhere's fucking racist. Everywhere is racist. Though I don't think of the South as a racist place. I think of the South as a region in which racism is present. I also know that racism is present everywhere. Just like misogyny. People say the South is misogynist. Yeah, it is. It's a region where misogyny is present. It's also present everywhere. The difference is it's easier to see here because we do have these vestiges of the past. And yeah, like they did tear down the statue of John Calhoun from Marion Square in downtown Charleston, and that was a great day, but it's still called Calhoun Street. And I think that that is what my friend meant when they were asking, when they mentioned the political climate, because the political climate nationwide is problematic, would be a very small word to use here. But things are just more apparent in the South. Let's think of it this way. Everywhere that I have ever been, there is a preconceived ideal that the default human being is a white, cis, hetero, straight man around 6 foot tall and 165 pounds. That's also like literally a unit of measurement that was built to, or that was used to rebuild Europe after World War II. That's why the stairs of government buildings are like maybe a little bit too big. They feel like unnaturally too big. It's because it was literally designed for this mythical 6 foot tall, 165 pound white man. Now that's something with a very specific history that you can point to. Be like, see, look, this is a way in which this mythical being was used as a standard of measurement. But subversively and subliminally in culture, that is considered the default human being. And I think that that is changing, but it only changes very slowly because that's how evolution works. And before something can change, it has to be noticed. And most people don't notice. And the thing is, the further you get away from being that default human being, whether it's in skin color or sexual orientation or gender or identity in any way or citizenship, the more obvious it will be to you that you are not the default human being. There are pockets that I have lived in and spent time in. I've lived in Seattle, I've lived in San Francisco, and these are blue places that are run on more progressive value systems. And it was much less obvious to me in these places that I wasn't the default human being. It is a lot more obvious to live in the American South that you are not the default human being. And there are repercussions to not being the default human being everywhere you go. It's just closer to the surface here. And I think that is what my friend meant. I was traveling recently and I had a layover in Denver, and it was just like an hour and a half layover both ways. And when I was in Denver, I was like, wow, people like look like me here. They like dress like me. And I can't say why. It's not like I stopped and interviewed all of them and was like, hey, you seem queer. Are you queer? I feel like there's a lot of queer people around me. I like this airport. But you can feel it. You can sense it. And it was lovely. And I find it's a rare space here in Charleston to feel like that. And I think that's also what my friend meant. I moved back to the South in 2018, and I knew it was going to be an adjustment. And I've talked, in that previous episode that I linked before about why I moved back here and why I love it here. And I do. I love it. Now, when I first moved back, when you go away from somewhere for many, many years and then you come back and you're like, oh, I kind of thought it would be different, but it's not. Like, yeah, that happened. It was being confronted with the sheer amount of misogyny and how obvious it was. Like I said, misogyny is everywhere, but it was just closer to the surface here, and it was more obvious, and not in ways that were inherently violent or cruel, but like small things. I'll give you like a pretty innocuous example. Let's say we do a favor, like we front some money to like purchase a thing for an older couple that Manflesh and I are close to. And they're like, thank you so much. Here, I'll write you a check. Because, of course, they're going to write a check. It's not like they have Venmo. And we're like, thanks, no worries. And they give you the check and it's written to Manflesh. Every time. Every time. Every time. Because it is assumed that the man is the head of the household and running all the finances and providing all of the finances. So obviously, if there's going to be a check written, it will be written to Manflesh because he controls the flow of money, which he doesn't. We are equal partners in our tiny little franchise of life. But that's just one example. So when I first moved back here in 2018, I think I was like pissed off for 6 months straight, just because I'm like, oh, right, I remember this. I don't know why I thought it would be different 12 years later, but it's not. And now I have to remember all of these things and realize that this is just how culture happens here right now. The added benefit, of course, being that in this stage of my life, I have a voice and I can say things and call it out where I see it. And you may have noticed that I've used the term closer to the surface several times already in this podcast. You're like, well, if it's closer to the surface, then why aren't you just saying it's on the surface? And that's because it's not. Like, when you, like, here in the South, right? Like, there's, how can I make a statement that is not overgeneralized? I do not commonly witness acts of violence in the street. People aren't hurling insults at each other. And that's what I mean when I say closer to the surface and not on the surface. Because if it were on the surface, it would be a state of active and constant unrest. And it's not. Because of another fundamental part of Southern culture, which is manners. We have a politeness culture here. There are pros and cons to politeness culture. The cons are almost no one gets to say what they actually mean, at least not in polite society, which means we don't have the benefit of hearing the clarity and the conviction that comes from really hearing someone's true opinion. Because we are trained, and I do mean all of us, to be extremely considerate of everyone else's feelings, especially, yes, if you're AFAB. But people of all genders are expected to be polite in the South. I could do a whole podcast episode on the pros and cons of politeness culture. But the pros of politeness culture are that generally people are pretty fucking nice to each other. I have not been catcalled a single time since I moved back. Not once. Because it's not polite. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I know that it does. But in San Francisco, it was every fucking day. Every fucking day. I could not walk from my car to the studio without listening to some man's opinion on my ass. Every day. And here, not once. Not once. Now, an elderly gentleman did stop me in the Costco parking lot a couple of weeks ago to tell me that I was a beautiful woman and that anyone who said otherwise was a damn fool. I'm going to go ahead and say I don't consider that catcalling. And perhaps it was because he was so polite about it. Not here to argue. I'm just saying I feel safer here in that specific way. There's also a slower pace of life in the South. And I very much do not want to do more things. I want to do less things with more intention. and attention. And it's damn sure easier to do something if you're surrounded by a culture that supports that thing. And in general, I will say, the pace of life is slower here. Now, there are admittedly less supportive structures in terms of organizations and resources for people who are creative or neurodivergent or queer or melanated than in a big blue city like San Francisco. The other side of that coin is that when you live in a place that is quote unquote smaller, it is easier to affect change from the foundation up. It's easier to have a sphere of influence that can make bigger ripples when there's like 5 of you rippling instead of 7,500. And I just wanted to point that out because the whole big fish, little pond thing, that axiom exists for a reason. And the reason is a big fish in a little pond can affect change to a greater degree. And that may be something to help focus your efforts. Now, regardless of where you live, and especially if you live in the South, your community is your saving grace. And yes, in a big blue city, it is going to be a hell of a lot easier to walk into a room full of people and know that, like, these are your people. We already know that. But your people are here, and you can find them. And actually, we must find them. That was the mission I set for myself last year, and find them I did. And now I don't know what I would do without them. And I'm not talking about a room full of people. I'm talking about a handful of people. Like, we don't need a certain amount of people that understand us and celebrate us the way that we are and support us the way that we are. We just need a number that we can be certain of. And it's also damn certain that when you live here, the people on either side of your house, it's very likely that you have extremely different political values. These are also the people that you need to call you if you are out of town and they notice your front door is open. This is another thing I mean by, like, it's close to the surface. Because if you're in a big blue city, you can just avoid interacting a lot more easily with anyone who isn't aligned with your exact views and values. It can be avoided in a big blue city. It cannot be avoided here. You need someone, like, you forgot to feed your cat, and you're not going to be home for 8 hours. You need your neighbors. If there's an ecological disaster, which is a lot more likely now, maybe your driveway gets blocked by a tree, you don't have a chainsaw, you need your neighbors. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, because you're not going to. But getting to know people as people is how we build local community. That doesn't mean they have to be in your inner sanctum, like right next to your pericardium. And you should be very particular about who is in your inner sanctum. You can be less particular about who's in your local community because we don't have control over who's in our local community. It's whoever else lives with us. For better or for worse, we are in this together. And it also gives us opportunities once there is a form of, maybe I won't use the word affection because sometimes that can be a tall order, but some kind of rapport that you can have with your local community that doesn't feel the same way that you do about things. When there's respect and rapport that already exist. there are possibilities for conversations. There are opportunities to invite them to your show or your reading and expose them to something that maybe they haven't thought about in a certain way before, and maybe their feedback is something that you haven't thought about before. Just like they say, you don't choose your family, the one that you're born into anyway, and you don't choose your local community either. I mean, you choose where to live, but you don't get to make that choice for everyone who lives nearby. So, looking at the time, I've passed 20 minutes. That's okay. To my friend who is moving back to the swamps, and I believe is already here, how to navigate day-to-day life. One, enjoy the pros of this place that you've chosen. Enjoy the slower pace of life. And enjoy the fact that generally people are polite. And enjoy that you can make and affect change to a greater extent. Like the ripples are more obvious that you make, and the change that you make is more clear. And of course, surround yourself with your inner sanctum. Find your people, and then outside of that inner sanctum, nourish what you can of your local community. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention enjoy what to me is like the best part of living here, which is the absolute tumbling, sprawling Eden garden that is the American South in its ecology. Also, it's almost cicada season, so you're about to be serenaded for months on end. And you're warm probably right now. You're probably warm, and you're going to be warm for months, and that's splendid. And of course, I'm here, so reach out if you need a boost. Many thanks to my friend for that question. I think I've been avoiding it because I didn't want to be responsible for a graduate level treatise on culture in the American South, because man, yeah, that could take a while. But I do hope it was helpful, and thank you all so much for listening to me and spending this time with me. The greatest compliment that you could give me is sharing this with someone that you thought it could help. If you have requests that you'd like to hear about, you can reach me always on Instagram at Rachel Strickland Creative or on Patreon at Rachel Strickland Creative. This podcast is powered by Patreon, and I got to give a shout out to my inner sanctum, my patrons, for making this and so much more possible for me. Thank you so much for standing with me, for believing in me, and making more of what I do possible. All right, my friends, until next time, don't let the bastards get you down, and don't go back to sleep.